All right, before we begin tonight, let's begin with a prayer. Father, we thank you for our salvation. We thank you for that blessed hope that we have in your Son, Jesus. We thank you for the way that he made that even though it might be narrow, it's straight and it's true and it's so clear. And we thank you for that provision that you made for us to be able to walk that path. And as we look at this doctrine tonight, I pray, Lord, that the thousands, even millions that are caught up into it, you would lay that burden on our hearts to pray for them. And at the same time, Lord, that we wouldn't get so caught up in fearing future events, that we wouldn't get so concerned in looking for Antichrist that we take our eyes off of the true Christ. And so we dedicate this time to you and pray that your Spirit would do the teaching, instructing, and we just ask that he would have his will. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, as usual, before we get started on the class tonight, if you'll turn your short quiz over, you'll see 10 real easy answers or questions with easy answers that you can provide. Write your name up in the upper right-hand corner. 9 of them are true and false. The last one is completion. There's 2 possible answers. Each one of those are worth 5 points. Or there are 2 answers. The rest of the questions are all worth 10 points. So you can just go ahead and begin when you're ready. I don't know that I've said this yet, but a lot of times, people will be looking for that hidden word or something like that. I don't give trick questions and things like that. So, either you know the answer or you don't, and it's not a matter of that I try to hide the meaning or something. And then as soon as you're finished, turn your paper over and we'll begin. Everybody about ready? Okay, let's begin. Number 1. True or false? Pantheism means all is one. Monism means all is God. False. What is it? Okay, it's the other way around. Pantheism is all is God, and monism is all is one. Okay. Basically, Hinduism teaches you can have what you want. True or false? True. Teaches you can have what you want. Okay, the 4 noble truths of Buddhism are an attempt to rise above pain and suffering. True or false? True. Remember the 4 noble truths, the truth that there is suffering, the truth that there's a cause of suffering, and so on? Okay. 4, the word Tao means to surrender. True or false? False. Okay. Number 5, the word Islam means the way. True or false? Okay, what do they both mean? Okay, again, they're just reversed. Islam means surrender, and Tao means the way. The Shahada is a sect of Islam. True or false? Eh? Okay, false. That's their thing that they say many, many times a day. No God but Allah. Okay, number 7. The Taoist word for the life flow is ki. True or false? True. The Hindu Godhead is represented as a being with one body but 3 heads. True or false? True. Brahman, Shiva, and Krishna. The goal of Hinduism is to know Brahman Atman. True or false? True. Number 10, reincarnation has 2 foundations. What are they? Karma is one. What's the other one? No? Pantheism. There are 2 foundations of reincarnation. Karma, which determines the life that you'll be into, and then the goal of reincarnation, which is to attain the Godhood, that all is God. Karma and reincarnation. Getting a little harder, aren't they? Okay, let's make sure you get these turned in to me by the end of the class so I can get them recorded. You get, no, each one of number 10 is worth 5 points. So if you miss one of them, then, and that's the only one you missed, you got a 95. The rest of the questions are all worth 10 points, and number 10 is worth 5 points each. Okay, in your handouts, along with your notes, you got a sheet of paper that's got some just kind of a potpourri of information on it. The one on the left-hand side, this one here, is a copy of the ad that was placed in the April 25th, 1982 LA Times, as well as several other major newspapers around the world. This is the one announcing the coming of the new Christ. And we'll be talking about that more a little bit later. This was kind of the siren that went off around the world of the New Age movement, that it actually existed. Prior to this time, there wasn't really a whole lot of account given to it. Then you see this New Age hymn up here. This is just one verse of one of the hymns that are sung. It's actually a song that's sung in some of the various New Age groups that are around. And then this New Age prayer, which is called the Great Invocation. Now, this was written back in the 30s, I believe, but just in the last 10 years or so has gotten a lot of impetus by some of these New Age groups. They believe, I mean, there are even churches around the United States and the world that use this invocation as part of their liturgy. It's been translated into 40-some languages, and there are organizations within the New Age movement that their sole purpose is to get this New Age prayer out into the masses, and under the belief that the more this is repeated, the more this is invoked, then the quicker this new kingdom will come. So if we have a chance, before the end of the class, we'll deal with each one of those more individually. So let's turn to our notes, and we'll begin. As I've taught this class in the past, the course of anthropology in the past, I have purposely avoided doing a class on the New Age movement because primary reason is that I believe that there has been a lot of misguided attention given to it in the last few years, and that some of this attention has potentially done more damage than good, in that I have seen a lot of Christians who become so involved in looking for the Antichrist of the New Age movement that they have forsaken their true calling of being as looking for Christ. And it appears as though a lot of people are reading these books about the New Age movement rather than reading the Bible like they should. But I got convicted the last time I was teaching the course in the fact that if we are going to take a look at man's reaction to the love that God has given him, then there is probably nothing in the 20th century that is more evident of that reaction than the New Age movement, at least in this decade. And so to just give the course its due, I thought that it was necessary that we might include a look at the New Age movement. I also would like to announce that in the beginning that I don't consider myself an expert on the New Age movement. There are a lot of things concerning it that I don't know as far as specifics and statistics, and so when we get to talking about the networking and the organizational structure and stuff like that, I've read a lot about it, but I don't know how much of it to accept. And so I don't really consider myself a Tex Mars or a Constance Cumby, but I have looked into it, and tonight what I would like to do is give a real brief, just kind of a scan of what the New Age movement is. I do believe the New Age movement to be a very powerful, valid force on the earth today. Whether or not this is going to be the means which with the Lord allows the Antichrist to come into being, he only knows, and he's the only one that knows. But it does appear from New Age literature and from New Age actions that it definitely is a possibility. Okay, before we get into it though, I would like to talk a little bit about why. You know, just aside from the fact that, okay, we could say, well, this is fulfilling prophecy, and we are in the last days, and all of this thing. Just aside from that, why the 1980s there is such a rise in the New Age movement? I mean, why did all of a sudden it come to the forefront? I was talking to a guy about this class the other day, and he was asking me a few questions, and he was really surprised to find out that the New Age movement, by any other name, is not new. It has been in the workings for about 100 years. And we're talking about the modern concept of the New Age movement. And he was really surprised by that because he thought it was just something that began back around 1975 and was surprised to the contrary. So why all of a sudden, if it's been in the works for 100 years, which we're talking like basically 4 generations of New Agers have been planning and setting the preparatory stage for this, then why all of a sudden? And I think there's some various reasons. It was interesting that when Paul was at Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17, there were 2 groups of individuals that he spoke with. There was the Epicureans and the Stoics. Now, the Epicureans were the atheists. They were the materialists. They were the ones that believed that existence on earth was your sole goal of man, was to make the most out of this life. Whereas the Stoics were the pantheists. They were the ones who saw everything in a very spiritual light, not in the Judaic-Christian spiritual light, but in a more of a pantheistic view. Well, there could be a modern-day parallel between the Epicureans and the Stoics in the secular humanists and the New Agers. There are a lot of similarities between, I mean, it sounds almost the exact opposite, you know, an atheist and a pantheist. I mean, how, you know, one person who says there is no God and somebody else who says everything is God. That sounds like diametrically opposed. And in some areas, and in some aspects, this is true. But then in a lot of things, they are not opposed. They are very together. In fact, there are a lot of New Agers are signers on Humanist Manifesto too, which is an interesting concept. Today, it appears, at least according to Norman Geisler, that the wave of humanism that flooded this nation in the middle half of the century, from John Dewey up until the middle 70s, late 70s, is beginning to wane. It's still very prevalent in the educational system, but as far as the politics and as far as the philosophy of secular humanism, it does appear to be waning. It doesn't have quite the impact behind it as what it had in the beginning. And this is probably due to, you know, I mean, you look at the technological advances that man has made in the last 50 years. You know, back in the days of John Dewey, I mean, when they were just starting to think about things like a little TV set, a black and white TV set, you know, look how much things have changed since then. And I mean, you know, space travel, strides in medicine, and even in philosophic areas and things like that. Man has really done a lot of good stuff. But all this stuff has failed. Man is worse off than he ever has been before. And so there's a word called meliorism that I use quite a bit in some of the other courses that I teach. And this is the doctrine that man will further his interests. He will make the earth a better place to live by his own efforts. And that's the doctrine of meliorism. M-E-L-I-O-R-I-S-M. Meliorism is not a very common word anymore, and that's because it doesn't work. And so from a philosophic standpoint, secular humanism doesn't have quite the power that it used to have. But there are, as I said, a lot of commonalities between secular humanism and the New Age movement, a lot of commonalities between atheism and pantheism. And these are primarily, they both deny an absolute distinction between creator and creation. You know, they both say that there is not some supreme being who said, light be, and then there was light. They both deny that God, whatever that concept of God might be, intervenes in the affairs of men. You know, of course, the humanists deny that, but so do the pantheists. The pantheists do not see any kind of intervention. And we'll talk more about that when we get into praying at the end of the class. And they both believe that man is God. They both believe in the divinity of man. In a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about that from the secular humanist point of view, and tonight we'll talk about it from the pantheistic point of view. Okay, also, another reason why I think the New Age movement is gaining such attention of late is that it is very much in vogue to oppose Christianity. There's a lot of opposition to Christianity, of course there always has been, but it's popular to oppose it now. Whether you're a Norman Lear or Madeline Murray O'Hare or Benjamin Crane of the Terra Center, it is popular to oppose Christianity. The Golden Book of the Theosophical Society, which is kind of the foundational book for the New Age movement that was written by the members of the Theosophical Society, we'll talk about in a minute, states this: it, that is theosophy, only refuses to accept and of the gods of the so-called monotheistic religions such as Judaism and Christianity, gods created by man in his own image and likeness, a blasphemous and sorry caricature of the ever unknowable. Okay, so according to theosophy, they accept all religions except those of the monotheistic school of thought. And they call that a blasphemous and sorry caricature of the ever unknowable. This phrase, ever unknowable, is one of those New Age buzzwords that you'll hear quite often. And just a little side note, I'll be giving a lot of quotes tonight. I'll just be reading a lot of quotes from some of these various people. It's not necessary that you transcribe these quotes down, but you might want to pick up some of the key phrases or words that they use, because there's probably no better way to present the position of the New Age movement than to do it out of their own words. Benjamin Crane, who is one of the modern-day spokesmen for the movement, said, "The Christian churches have released into the world a view of the Christ which is impossible for modern people to accept. As the one and only Son of God, sacrificed by a loving Father to save us from the results of our sins, a blood sacrifice straight out of the old Jewish dispensation." So even though on one hand the New Age movement claims to be very receptive of all faiths, on the other hand they are very anti-Semitic and very anti-Christian. There was a special that was run on one of the local news segments a few months ago where they did a whole series on the New Age movement, and one of the things that they kept bringing up in every one of the segments is that one of the reasons why the New Age is so popular today is that it is so had so much in common with Christianity, and that Christians could be able to accept the New Age philosophy without forsaking the doctrines of their faith. And as we'll see tonight, that is not possible at all. Okay, another reason for the rise in occultism, or the rise in the New Age movement today, is the rise in the occultism. The occult is basking in popularity in a way that it has never before in any of the stages of men, or stages of mankind. For example, Unity, the Unity School, located up in Kansas City, is continually growing bigger and bigger. And there are a lot of Unity-type minor cults throughout the nation and the world. Baha'ism is growing. Christian Science, Scientology, Guruism. All of these things are more popular, if not necessarily gaining more members. They're more popular and more accepted than ever before. Hare Krishna is another one. The whole Krishna movement, which I'd like to correct something that I said last week when we were talking about the Hare Krishnas. Don asked me if the Bhagavad Gita was the little book that they tried to sell you at the airports, and I had said no, and I did some that I didn't think that was true, and I did some research into that this week, and I found out that in a way it is a kind of it would be similar to our Living Bible. Okay, it's a paraphrase that is done by the founder of the Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada, who has done a paraphrase of it, and it's kind of like his commentary. It's called the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and it's just a very 20th century, 1980s look at their Bible. Another one that is very popular, especially on the West Coast, is the Church Universal and Triumphant, which is Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She's one of the major New Age spokespersons of this day, and so on and so forth. There are many occult groups that are very. I mean, these people are accepted. They're on TV. A lot of them are welcomed within a lot of the churches. Occultism permeates the media. I mean, there is hardly, you can go into the mall and it's hardly possible to see one of the 5 or 6 screens that are now showing some particular movie that doesn't have something to do with the occult. There's always something, whether it's the Witches of Eastwick or something. There's always an occult movie out, it seems like. TV shows, beginning back in the 60s with Bewitched and that sort of thing. It's as though the media is permeated with it. Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, it's hard to find one that is not steeped in occultism today, and it's very accepted. It's just considered to be the accepted thing. You see here, I have TM in the schools. Though not taught as TM, the doctrine of transcendental meditation is being taught even in very early grades. Let me paint a scenario. The teacher might get the group sitting in a circle and then talking to them for a while, and then she would ask them all to close their eyes. And picture yourself on top of a grassy hillside with the sun shining down, and there's wildflowers all around, and the wind's blowing through your hair, and just the perfect 80-degree temperature, and just really beautiful, peaceful. And she paints this scene, and then she says, and then picture this man coming up to you and asking you what it is that could make your life more enjoyable. If he could give you anything that would make your life more enjoyable, and then your answer is ... and then the children would write an essay on whatever it is that they think at that particular time. And this is just a basic indoctrination into TM. I mean, that's how TM begins. That's, if you were to take some TM courses, that's how they would begin indoctrinating you into it. So that very, very prevalent in the school. In fact, there are a lot of modern educators. I was watching a video the other day where they interviewed several teachers who were saying that this is, the cycle psychological aspects of TM are phenomenal. I mean, this is the answer to the problems in the schools, is to get people tuned into meditation. And there appears to be within the occult realm, I mean, 20 years ago when you talked about the occult, you pictured up these ideas in your mind of a real dark room with a bunch of candles and people wearing dark robes and chanting in some sort of a lost, forgotten language. And that was the picture that when you said occult, that's what people thought of. But today there are very many white-collar religions that are just as occultic as anything that came out of Rosemary's Baby. Erhard Seminar's training, which is a New Age approach to philosophy or psychology, I guess. Psychology would be a better word for it. It's now called the Forum. And this is an area, this is a thing where the people pay a lot of money. I think it's like $250 a pop, something like that. And they go to this weekend in some hotel where they would, get into the large meeting room or something like that. And then they spend a weekend of having somebody just call them every name in the book, tell them how ugly they are, put down their wife right in front of them, and just totally tear down all defenses so that the person can finally let the real them come out. And there are a lot of corporations that are very big on this sort of thing. I mean, they're sending their executives to this sort of thing to make them better people. Holistic health fads, from the microbiotic diets to sleeping under geodesic domes. All of this sort of thing is very, very popular among the yuppie generation. Biofeedback, which is the Western technology's answer to yoga. How can I, and it has been scientifically documented that the very same physiological effects that take place under Hatha yoga, we were talking about that last week, the physical yoga of getting in these particular positions in order to make yourself ready for opening up to the cosmic wow. The very same physiological effects can be achieved through biofeedback, which is hooking yourself up to machines that actually control your body functions. You can slow down your heart rate. You can slow down your central nervous system. You can do anything through biofeedback by affecting the biorhythms. Biorhythms being your heartbeat. Just the rhythm of your heartbeat is constant. You breathe constantly and this sort of thing. Well, they can alternate that, and then that can produce an altered state of consciousness. And so all these things are very common, very popular. This whole fascination with the occult is, I think back to, in my younger days, back in the 60s, and the group that I ran with had this whole hippie fascination with tarot cards and all this sort of thing. It's gone far beyond that, although those haven't waned either, but it has come into its own. Carlos Castaneda and all of his teachings about Don Juan might have been foundational for what has happened since then. Okay, so what is the New Age movement? In fact, quite often, a lot of people who know a lot about the New Age movement will say such thing doesn't even exist. A lot of people that are very steeped in it don't even know, just don't know. Like I was sharing about the relative that I have last week, who is as much of a Western Hindu as anybody I've ever seen before, and didn't know anything about the titles or the handles that go along with it. Just believed the doctrines and the philosophies. So what constitutes a New Age religion, or what is the New Age movement? There's no headquarters. There's no central place that says this is the unified, universal home of the interplanetary, global, village, spaceship, Earth, New Age movement base. There's no place that says that. And so it's kind of hard to nail something like that down, but there are several broad-based organizations worldwide that have this common goal, common philosophy. For example, I mentioned the Terra Center of Benjamin Cream. He has centers. There are Terra Centers throughout the earth. There's England, Europe, and 3 that I know of in the United States. The Lucis Trust, which was began by Alice Bailey, and we'll talk about her more in a little bit, in the United States, the Club of Rome, and so on. All of these are very broad-based organizations that have this common goal of seeing this new order instituted. And we'll talk more about that new order as we go along. Various terms that go with this. You know, it's by not having a central location, there's no official name for it. I mean, this is a movement, the people say. This is just the way that man is evolving. He is entering into this new age. So there are very diverse handles, and depending upon the perspective, there are a lot of various ways of looking at the New Age movement. You can look at it from a religious point of view, political point of view, a health point of view, a philosophical, and so on. So depending upon how you're looking at it is what the various names that it's known by. A few of them are Aquarian conspiracy. This is kind of a catch-all phrase. The age of Aquarius. Human potential movement. This is where you'll hear this phrase a lot in some of the Southwestern Bell and some of these other big conglomerates that have these New Age seminars for the efforts for attaining the goal of making their executives more prolific in their whatever function they have. This is called the human potential movement. You know, it's kind of a self-motivation type of thing. Cosmic humanism is another term that you'll hear. New consciousness, and so on. So, as a working definition, and I say a working definition because I don't want to limit it to any particular thing. And this is not my definition. This is Norman Geisler's. But as a working definition, I've wrote it here on the board. And as I said, I wouldn't want to limit it to any one thing. But at the same time as we're looking for a definition of the New Age movement, I wouldn't want to make it so broad that we enter into, that we become guilty of a Salem witch hunt and trying to place everything we find that might even innocently use some of these buzzwords and buzz phrases that are indigenous to the New Age movement and say, okay, well, that guy just used the word visualization, so this must be a New Age organization. You know, I would hate to do something like that, as that would be, to me, be as dangerous as just being ignorant to the whole thing. So as a working definition for the New Age movement, we could say that it's a broad coalition of various networking organizations that A, believe in a new world religion, which is pantheism, B, are working for a new world order that is social and economic, and C, are expecting a New Age Christ. Okay? So if you want to, and I think you could even safely say that a New Age organization wouldn't necessarily need to adhere to all three of those goals in order to qualify for this, because there are some very you could almost say humanistic worldview organizations that are definitely New Age in scope, but they don't consider themselves to be pantheists. You know, so they don't have a pantheistic view. And as far as looking for a New Age Christ, they're just looking for a world leader. And the spirituality of the matter doesn't even enter into their scope. And I think they would still qualify as being a New Age group. Okay, a little bit of history about the movement. Back in the 1800s, there was this chick by the name of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who was basically the Grand Madam. In fact, she's known as Madame Blavatsky. She was the Grand Madam of Western occultism. She was the one who brought Hinduism to Europe and America. She is probably the one that is most responsible for doing so. In the beginning, she was a spiritualist. You know, she was into spiritism and the whole thing of seances and contacting the dead and necromancy and all of that. Later on, after she got involved in Hinduism, she looked back on her days as spiritualist and renounced that as all being fraud, and there's no such thing as spiritualism as far as it being something true. She founded, with the help of Colonel Henry Alcott and a guy by the name of William Judge, this Theosophical Society in 1875. Henry Alcott and William Judge. I went to the library this week and I checked out a couple of books on biographies of her. Now, these are not the Christians' approach at let's see how quick we can tear down the New Age movement. This was some secular authors who were taking a look at a woman who did much to shape occultism in the Western world and just investigated it, just see what they had to say. And both of these authors came to the conclusion that she was very possibly a fraud. She wrote many books. The two most famous are Isis Unveiled, which I have a copy of here, and Secret Doctrine, which goes into more of the theology of theosophy than Isis Unveiled. It deals more with the specifics of the theology. Interestingly enough, a woman who was, in fact, this one author even says she died in abject poverty and she was just a recluse and just had been kind of ridiculed by the whole West because the Psychic Institute of Research examined all of her claims, and these are guys that believe in occult phenomena and so on, and they examined all the things that she said as far as the writings that she received telepathically from her spirit guides and so on, and just said that there was no basis for it, there was no validity to it. But guys like Thomas Alva Edison, H.G. Wells, Lord Alfred Tennyson, even Abner Doubleday, the guy that invented baseball, these kind of guys flocked to her side and just, venerated her. These were all members of the Theosophical Society. And she had some sort of, in fact, everything that I've read on her this week, just there was a hypnotic magnitude in her azure eyes that were just, she could sway whole nations. And in fact, even boasted about that, like she would make statements how she could say anything and make anybody believe it. And it appears as though that was possibly true. Now, basically, just in a nutshell, what Theosophy believes is that it takes the teachings of evolution from a physical standpoint and applies the same thing to a spiritual view. And they believe that man and earth, now talking about man from the spiritual point and earth from the physical point, are going through 7 stages of development or evolution. And that man is currently in his 5th stage, the earth is in its 4th. So the earth has 3 more to go through, and man has 2. And as near as I was able to understand from the different resources that I looked into, I never could get a real definitive statement in this, but it appeared as I gleaned a little bit from various sources that basically their view on Jesus is that he is a man who has reincarnated into that 6th level. Okay, most mankind is in the 5th level. Well, Jesus was a man who has come back in the 6th level, and because he lived that perfect life on earth, then when he died, he graduated to the 7th level, which is perfection. And so he has arriven. He's there where he needs to be. And he was the one to show the rest of those how to get there. And we'll look into that more when we look at some of the specific 1980s New Age doctrines on Jesus. She had a teaching on what she called Mahatmas. Now, this varied somewhat from Hinduism in that a true Mahatma in Hinduism is just a title that is given to a spiritual leader, a guru. For example, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma just being a title of enlightened one or anointed one that they would give to many gurus in many different ages and many even at the same time. Well, she took that foundation. To her, a Mahatma was a very enlightened one. In fact, there was a few of them on earth, and they lived high up in the Himalayas in Tibet, and most people didn't even know they existed. And they just they were very, very old, possibly even hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old, and they just kind of lived up there, and they just knew all the answers. And supposedly her doctrines were formed by going and sitting at the feet of these masters and getting their revelations or her from them, and then she would pass them on. And then she had a spirit guide by the name of Kut Humi. Kut Humi, or known by his initials KH. Now, again, one of these biographers did some research into, there was one guy who just, adulated Blavatsky. And when she said that she had gone up to these particular mountains and sat at the feet of these particular men, and that's where she received all her revelations, he thought there was no better way to achieve nirvana than to do the same thing. And so he went to Tibet, and he, in his diary, told all of the trials that he went to try to talk to some of these Tibetan masters. And everything that whenever he would find any of these gurus up there of any degree or level to talk to, and he would explain to them what he had gone through, or the things that Blavatsky was teaching, they would just laugh. You know, like, you got to be kidding. You came all this way just to have me laugh at you. But then as he went all the way and kept trying to get higher and higher and try to get to, well, where is this true Shangri-La, type of existence sort of thing, he met with much opposition. He was attacked. He was beaten. People would sick their dogs on him. He ended up having to live off of wildflowers for a time because he was just dying of hunger. And, he came away very disillusioned and just said that he believed that everything she taught was a fraud. She died in 1895, and when she did, there was a big power struggle between Judge and Alcott, the two guys that helped her form it. Judge wanted to make the headquarters in America and was more interested in extremely westernizing it, making it very palatable to the Occidental mind, whereas Alcott wanted to center it more in England and Europe and wanted to bring more of the Eastern philosophy and the Hinduistic terms and that so on, that sort of thing into it. So they ended up having a split and formed two societies, and both are still in existence today. Most Theosophists are followers of Alcott, who went more of the way of Blavatsky than Judge did. But there are a few Judgeites still around in America. The next one to succeed her to the throne was a woman by the name, she's very outspoken, just a very flamboyant character by the name of Annie Besant, who was a former atheist, and upon meeting Madame Blavatsky was so enamored by her presence that she just couldn't shake this magnetism that she had. And so she came to her, and after their initial meeting, and she says, "I would like to sit at your feet." And Blavatsky handed her an article that had been written by the Psychic Research Foundation that said she was a fraud, and she says, "You go home and you read this, and then if you still want to talk to me, well, okay." And so she went home and she read all of this, and of course she figured that they didn't know what they were talking about, and so she came back and she said, "I've only got one goal in life, and that's for you to teach me everything you know." So she became her #1 disciple. She was patterned to pick up where Blavatsky left off. And but she was just a little bit too flamboyant. She was a little bit too outspoken. She was very political. She tried to, she was a strong advocate of birth control and this sort of thing. She tried to usher in the new Messiah, even in her day. And this was done in the form of a man by the name of Jiddu Krishnamurti. He was a guru, although he eschewed the title, because the foundation of his teaching is that he denied all spiritual authority. There are no such thing as teachers. There are no such thing as guides. There's nobody who has anything over anybody else, because we're all God, and we should all look within ourselves for our spiritual authority. This is kind of the basis of his teaching, which was so popular, everybody looked to him as a spiritual authority. And so no matter how much he denied that, he was one nonetheless. With Besant's help, or actually it was under her direction, he was really kind of passive in the matter, there was formed the Order of the Star of the East, which is now today called the Krishnamurti Foundation of America. And it was through this order that they were going to make him take the stage as the new Christ, as the new Messiah. And it was only, I mean, they put, it was like they put all of their eggs into the Krishnamurti basket. And then just when he was ready to take, they'd made all the public announcements and everything, and when it was time for him to do it, he said no. A lot of it was due to the death of his father, who was a guru of sorts, that caused him to be very disillusioned. But then it was also because he just didn't buy it. You know, no, I'm not the Messiah. And the last reference I could find to him, which was Larson's Book of Cults, he's still alive. He was very popular back in the 70s. He went into kind of a semi-seclusion for many years. But he in the 70s, he was still alive and well and kicking. And every once in a while, he would go on a speaking tour of the United States, and just thousands of young, barefooted, long-haired flower children would come and sit at his feet and just think it was so cool, because he's anti-establishment. I mean, he does not believe in any establishment of authority whatsoever. The only goal of man is to look inside himself and find God. And that's just his doctrine in a nutshell. So there is the Krishnamurti Foundation of America today, and if he is still alive, he denies its existence. He denies the fact that he's the leader of it, but he is, you know, whether he wants to be or not. Okay. The Theosophical Society was very embarrassed by Annie's bull in a china closet approach. So after she formed the Order of the Star of the East and left the Theosophical Society, they looked for someone to take her place, and they found a much more reserved, much more contemplative, and much more prolific spokesman for their philosophies in the person of Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey was an English woman. She was a Christian teacher, raised in a Christian family, Episcopal or Anglican, and from very devout parents. She taught in Sunday school and the whole thing. She ended up marrying an American who was going to school to become an Episcopalian rector, and he was a very nice man. He just had one vice, and that was he liked to beat up on her and her kids. She had many kids by him. And after a period of time, she decided that this wasn't too much of a way to live, and so she left him and moved to L.A. Got a job in a fish cannery and was there supporting her several children and just kind of eking out a meager living as a fish canner. While she was there, she heard that there were two other English women that worked at the cannery or that lived in her neighborhood, and she went and looked them up and formed friends just out of a cultural need, and found out that these two were both members of the Theosophical Society. Well, the story goes that when she was still a teenager back in England, she was sitting in her father's drawing room one Sunday morning, and this man came in who was wearing a European suit and had his head in a turban. And she was kind of a precocious, spoiled little girl as a teenager. I mean, she openly admitted that herself. And this man came up to her and said, "If you get your act together, there's a mighty work in store for you." And turned around and walked out. Okay, well, she didn't really give that a whole lot of thought. I don't know why. That would have freaked me out. But she didn't give it a whole lot of thought after that until when she met these two English women, and they introduced her to Theosophy and brought her to the headquarters there in I believe it was in Hollywood, someplace in the L.A. area. And when she walked into the room, there was this big portrait of this guy in a European suit with this turban on, and she goes, "That's the guy that came to my house when I was 15 years old." And they said, "Well, that's Kuthumi. That's the great K.H." And so from that moment on, she was a convert, and she interpreted everything in light of that experience. I mean, that was her, she was convinced then. She didn't stay with the Theosophy movement very long. She married Foster Bailey, another fellow occultist, and between the two of them, they started several organizations, just various occult organizations, some of which are still cooking today. The Arcane School, ARCANE, in 1923, which is still in existence. The New Group of World Servers, also known as Servants of the World or world servants. It's not just known by any combination of those words. Is very instrumental today. It's a very powerful organization that is big in things such as Ethiopian famine and this sort of thing. It's we're gonna physically make the world a better place to live by feeding all the hungry people and doing away with poverty and that sort of thing. Organizations such as Triangles, which I couldn't find anything out about, World Goodwill, and so on. They founded many of these type of centers and groups and clubs. She was also a very prolific writer, and through her writings, the nuts and bolts and the theology of the New Age movement was lit. She even set down the timelines, and she gave time frames which these things would be instituted. They formed a publishing company in order to print her works and get them distributed, and it was called the Lucifer Publishing Company. A few years later, they changed the name to the Lucis Publishing Company, Lucis, and that's the name that it goes by today. This is a subsidiary of the Lucis Trust that was founded by Foster and Alice Bailey. Her primary work, I mean, she's got several, but probably as far as the nuts and bolts of the New Age movement, where she laid down the, okay, this is what we're going to do for the next 50 years, guys. And if you follow this, the new order will be brought in. That's kind of basically what she did. And the primary work that this is contained in is the externalization of the hierarchy. Book called The Externalization of the Hierarchy. Our library has this in stock, although it is checked out at the moment by someone. And then probably the last great milestone in the history of the New Age movement as far as the developments is the finding of Findhorn, or the founding of Findhorn. This is a center, communal conglomeration of various, this is where the people live, eat and breathe, and do their work, of some of the leaders of the New Age movement. It's in Scotland. It was founded in 1962 by Peter and Eileen Caddy. And according to Constance Cumby, this is the Vatican City of the New Age. This is their head. If they had a headquarters, this is where it would be. Pardon? Peter and Eileen Caddy, C-A-D-D-Y. And the goal of Findhorn is to anchor the plan on earth. Okay, to anchor the plan on earth. Now, as far as contemporary spokespersons, we have several here, and I'm just going to run through these real fast. I just gave, I'll even mention their books, but if you want to catch the titles and everything, I would suggest you get them during the break. It's not that important. The main reason why I wanted to do this is for two reasons: to show you the diversity of scope, and to show you the time frame with which these guys are connected. I mean, all of these works are within about a 5-year period. So it's from about 75 to 82. That's when these things were really happening. Okay, as far as a general overall spokesperson for the New Age movement, as far as authorship goes, probably Marilyn Ferguson in her book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, which was published in 1980. This was, this is the one where she laid out all of the networking, the organizational structure, and she kind of took everything that Alice Bailey had, all of her prolific works, and put them into one book, and just kind of summarized everything. She says, now is the age, 1970 was the dawning. Well, the sun has risen on the age of Aquarius, and now we're seeing it. Okay, from a religious dimension, David Spangler, who is at Findhorn. He's wrote a couple of books: The Revelation, Birth of New Age, 1976, and Reflections on the Christ, 1978. As well as numerous magazine articles and speaking lecture tours that he does. Benjamin Cream, the guy that took out this ad that I was showing at the beginning of the class, the founder of the Terra Centers worldwide. He is the self-appointed John the Baptist. He equates himself as the prophet of Revelation. And his main books are The Reappearance of Christ and Messages from Maitreya, the Christ. Both of these were written in the late 70s. Also, George Trevelyan, he's an English guy. He does most of his writings over there, and he has The Vision of the Aquarian Age, 1977, and Operation Redemption, 1981. All of these guys were primarily influenced by the Aquarian Gospel. Remember I mentioned that last week in the Black Muslim movement. The Aquarian Gospel was written by Levi Dowling in 1907. And basically what the Aquarian Gospel does is take the teachings of Jesus and pantheicize them. He turns Jesus into a pantheist who was very occultic in all of his statements, and what he'll do is he'll take the stories from the Bible. He'll take the scenario from the Bible and then change all the dialogue and the outcome and everything and make it very pantheistic. And we'll be referring more to that as we go through it. Politics, Mark Satin is probably one of the biggest guys right now. New Age Politics and Healing Self and Society, 1979. Robert Mueller, The New Genesis, 1982, was, at least as near as I can find out, he still is. I don't know who it is now, but a few years ago anyway, he was the Assistant Secretary General to the UN, and he's one of the big political leaders. Science, Fritjof Capra wrote the book The Tao of Physics. Paul Bohm does a lot of work in quantum theory. Paul Davies and a couple of other people are big on anthropology, trying to show the origins of man from a pantheistic view rather than just a strictly humanistic or a creationistic. Psychology, Abraham Maslow, and there are many many psychologists that write in New Age themes, such as Carl Jung and Carl Rogers, many of these type. Health, which is basically holistic and vegetarian. You've got Viktoras Kolvanauskas. He wrote the New Age Directory to Holistic Health Guide in 1981. And Leslie Kasloff, who wrote The Holistic Dimensions in Healing sometime in the 1980s. These are the basic spokesmen depending upon what area you're looking at for the New Age movement. And you can see their writings are confined within about a 5-year period. So let's take a break and then we'll come back to the plan. Okay, last couple of minutes there before the break, I was scooting along there pretty fast. I wanted to get through these spokesmen before we took the break. Are there any questions? Like I said, if you want the books, just come see me after class or something. I'll give you the title of the books, but I don't know what good they would do you to have the title. Yeah?
Just a real brief definition of holistic health.
Holistic health is basically an approach at health. And of course, the common view is that it's making the whole man healthy. And there's no way that you can be physically healthy unless you're spiritually healthy. No way you can be mentally healthy unless you're physically healthy, and that sort of thing. Their approach to doing so is incorporating everything from diets, which are primarily vegetarian, but there's even approach to, well, you eat this particular kind of food in the morning and then this particular food in the afternoon, and it's all very scientific in its approach, but then, or supposedly so. Then within that, I used to have a friend who didn't know anything about any of this, but had some friends who were, and had kind of, got him into a few little tidbits, and they had introduced him to this thing of pyramid power. And they had given him and his wife these little pyramids, little brass pyramids for a wedding present or something. And they were to be used to do everything, like they put their razor blades at night. They'd put their razor blades on top of these pyramids, and then they would stay sharp 10 times longer. And crystals are very big, the use of crystals, the healing capacities. Holistic health goes everything from just vegetarian diet into things such as psychic surgery. yeah.
That Garvey group out on the north edge of town is holistic.
Yeah.
And has the pyramid and the domes
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah, there's triangles, pyramids, and crystals are very big in the holistic health movement as far as having, of course, their approach to it is very scientific. It's not magic, and that's one of the things I was looking through Madame Blavatsky's first book, Isis Unveiled, and in her preface she makes it very clear, I'm not talking about magic, I'm talking about science. And that there is, just like magnetism is an enigma until you understand it, so are pyramids, and so are triangles, and so are, these sort of things. And so geodesic domes are very popular now because you get all these triangles put together in one place, and it's concentrated power, magnified power.
But is there some kind of documented?
That would depend on who you asked. Some people would say yes, it very is, and then you would have other people that say no, it's so subjective, and there's so many variables that there's nothing documented. So as far as the validity of the spiritualistic stances that the New Age movement takes, I can't say for myself because I don't know. On one hand, the Christians say, well, yeah, but it's just demon-backed. It's the demons that are the force behind it. And I would say if there is validity to the power, then that would be the case. Then on the other hand, I heard a Christian say one time, well, what if there is something, to water dowsing that is just that there's a magnetic force, a static electrical force that's produced by the water that draws this particular type of, so I don't know. But it's just like, okay, let's take music. New Age music. Everybody wants to know, well, is there a connection between New Age music and the New Age movement? Well, according to the New Age movement, there is. The New Age practitioners use New Age movement to produce transcendental states. It's very calming and very euphoric and this sort of thing. To say that there is something magical within it, to say that there is something, supernatural or transcendental or subliminal, I don't know. It's beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and I know people who listen to New Age music just because they don't like to have their ears pounded by rock and roll, and so they listen to the other side. And I don't know. I don't know if there is substance to all of that or not, but I know that as far as the pyramids and the triangles and stuff like that, the New Age practitioners do use that to bring about their state. So, just the use of it is wrong. Also, it does fall into the category of the occult, which is forbidden in Scripture.
Okay, one of them just real small, we don't need to make a lot of
Okay.
comment, but Jung and Rogers, who are probably spokesmen for much psychology, including quote-unquote Christian psychology, what are their basic tenets that they blew in America?
Well, I don't know that they are definitely using. I'm not familiar with them in Christian.
They're not. They're people that somebody has listened to and somebody has said.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't call them spokesmen for the New Age movement, but they do have New Age themes in their psychology, such as syncretism, such as they have a monistic approach to humanity, which is, and their psychology is based on that. Rogers even goes so far as making a spiritual, I read some things, quotes by him. I haven't read any of his articles or anything, but I've read quotes by him where he even makes spiritualistic as far as the fact that there is something very cosmic wow to this whole thing known as the psyche. So to say that everything they've ever said and done in their life is wrong, you can't go that far either, but they do make those tendencies. Huh? Yeah. Okay. Another thing before we go on to, if I said that article came out in 1985, it wasn't 85, it was 82, that the ad in the LA Times, it was April of 1982. So if you wrote that down, then that's... Okay, the plan. Now this is the title. Yeah, another question.
Could you repeat your working definition for the New Age movement?
Repeat the working definition for the New Age movement. Okay. It is a broad coalition of various networking organizations that A, believe in a new world religion, which is pantheism, B, are working for a new world order, which is both social and economic, and C, expect a new age Christ. And we'll be talking about those three aspects and what they mean in this half. Okay, the plan, and this is the title, this is what it's known by. In fact, if you look on the New Age prayer, notice that last line. And it says to bring the plan to earth or something like that. The plan is basically the institution or the institutionalization of this new order and this new religion and ushering in this new Christ. That's what the plan is. How we're going to go from point A, which is where we are, to point B, which is seeing all this saying come down. It is to be established by voluntary cooperation from various and diverse occult groups, and social and political. The basic principles of the plan are pretty much the same thing that we've been going over all along. Pantheism, the eternality of all things, in other words, the eternal existence of material matter, although the spiritual aspect of New Age movement looks at more of it's kind of that cosmic thing of kind of like Christian Science, where matter doesn't really exist. It's, you know, everything is spiritual, and matter is spiritual manifested, sort of thing. This is what Levi Dowling said. Continuing revelation, and this is the fact that God, and we're not talking about the same God that you and I know, but God is continually revealing itself throughout all eternity. And each time He does so, it does so in a more progressive way. Whatever the stage, you know, we're talking about those 7 stages that all things go through. Okay, well, if man is in his 5th stage now, then each time he goes to another stage, that revelation will become more profound and more in more depth. And they also believe in the basic principle of physical and spiritual evolution. Just as man evolved physically from a lower form of life to a higher form of life, he will do so spiritually from a lower form to a higher form, to where he will rise above such things as crime, poverty, and so on by achieving a higher spiritual plane that will make the physical plane, you know, blasé. If this sounds like every Star Trek episode you ever saw, there's probably a good reason why. Another basic tenet, or a very important facet and aspect of the plan, is networking. Now, networking, according to Marilyn Ferguson, who wrote the Aquarian Gospel, or the Aquarian Conspiracy, is achieved. Now, remember, we've got all of these organizations that are very loosely connected. There's no center, there's no headquarters, there's no official spokesman who says this is the stand of the New Age movement. You know, that doesn't exist. So how is this going to come about if they're not together somehow? Well, that's why networking is so important. And according to her, networking is achieved by conferences, phone calls, air travel, books, papers, workshops, lectures, and so on. In other words, they just communicate. They're in constant communication with each other by whatever means are available to them. Pamphleteering. If this particular organization over here just has a mass media blitz, then it lets all the other organizations know what's going on. And since they all have the common goal, then they just get in line with that. This is the claim anyway. Okay, one of the main aspects, according to Ferguson, of networking is what's known as spins. Spins, S-P-I-N. A spin is a segmented, polycentric, integrated network. I'll write it on the board. A segmented, polycentric integrated network. Okay, these are known as spins. She says if you were to look at an organizational chart of a group of spins, it would look like a very loosely knotted fishnet, where you had all of these different size knots and sizes of the net. In fact, she says that the whole New Age movement is nothing more than spins built upon spins, built upon spins, and so on, almost in a never-ending ascending spiral. And within these spins are what's known, what they call New Age centers. Now, the difference between a spin and a New Age center, as near as I can understand it, and maybe you'll read something somewhere that would be more definitive than what I've been able to see, but spins are New Age. Okay, for example, the Terra Center or Lucis Trust, Club of Rome. These are the biggies, and then down below that you've got your various holistic health centers. You got the place out on North Hillside and these sort of things who are actively working toward. We know that we are consciously New Agers, and we're looking toward this plan, to bring this plan in whatever role I can fill. A New Age center, on the other hand, is a group that might believe in a particular philosophy or aspect of the New Age movement that would be friendly toward that type of thing, and would therefore be very conducive to this whole ushering in mentality. For example, in 1972, in their directory, in the New Age directory. Now, 75 was the year that they really came out of the closet, but before that time it was around and just kind of being very static and preparatory to what happens in 75. But in the 72 directory of all of the New Age buddies, the People's Temple was listed as a New Age center, and they were very proud of the fact that Jim Jones was, because of his whole, he was the socialist, the West Coast Socialist Front as a New Age center. So because of his philosophy and the work that he was doing, it was making it very conducive to attain the philosophies of the New Age movement from that socialist point of view. In fact, the aspect of doing away with the wealthy and doing away with poverty and making it distribution of the wealth sort of thing. Okay. Then came the whole thing in Guyana, and if you look at a directory today, People's Temple was just immediately dropped quietly. There was no longer any mention of them. But this is an example. Now, Jim Jones was not a New Ager. Jim Jones was a Jim Joneser, but he was considered to be friendly by them, whether he even knew the New Age existed or not. He could be used to bring about their purposes. So that's what a New Age center is. Any questions over the two of them? I mean, this is the way I understand it anyway. And
denominations that need to be listed?
most definitely. In fact, here is, okay, you see next here, synergy. Synergy or synergism is, the Webster's definition of synergism is two or more units that working together can accomplish something that they couldn't do individually. Okay, United States of America is a synergistic approach to government. Okay, synergism or synergy from a New Age point of view is the idea that, well, you've got this World Population Organization over here, you got this World Hunger Organization over here, you got this World Monetary Organization over here, you got this World Religion Organization over here, and they're all working together to bring about this world order. Okay, there's none of these organizations that can do it on their own, but all of them working together can bring about this new thing. And when you take sleepy and or liberal denominations, and they could very easily be put into this, and that's why this big fever today of the sleeping church better wake up and so on, because the church is being seduced and this sort of thing is going on. Well, I found this book at the library. This is on a Christian, a fairly well-known Christian publishing house called The Spirit of Synergy. And this is done by a man who is the pastor of a church in the Middle West, who was suffering from various illnesses, and he had gone to all different places looking for help, and finally found help in psychic surgery. And so now he preaches it. He preaches synergism as the fact that we can all pool our spiritual, physical, and mental, emotional, and everything resources, and we can bring, there's no end to what we can do. He preaches this from the pulpit, and this guy could be very easily considered as a New Age sinner, and maybe he is, for all I know. I don't know. Yeah.
Interfaith Ministries is doing something this weekend with where they're getting a bunch of all the different religions together. I can't remember what all it's called, but is Interfaith Ministries, is their little gathering, does it fall under number one here, or I'm sorry?
Number one or number two? I don't know. If you say, is it possible? I could say, yeah, it's possible. But I don't think ecumenism or an ecumenical act is necessarily a New Age act. I wouldn't equate the two. Any more than I would say that because a particular denomination might get a little bit off what we consider to be orthodox in our approach to Christianity, and let's just say that, okay, let's take the thing of visualization, which is that's one of the big New Age buzzwords right now. Visualization can be a very subjective term, depending upon what my definition of it is. And so I might go to a church that gets into some sort of inner healing is another one. Now, these concepts are definitely New Age when you look at them in view of the New Age philosophy. But they don't have, these are not copyrighted terms. And someone else could use the term of visualization and not mean something as far down the road as what maybe Elizabeth Clare Prophet would mean by it. And so just because a particular church or denomination might do something that they call visualization, visualize Christ washing you clean of your sins, sort of thing. I don't know that that's necessarily wrong, or that would necessarily place them as a New Age sinner, as some would say. So we need to be guarded against that, as well as need to be aware that this sort of thing. We need to be aware of this, but we don't want to put everybody in that box just because they might go to the left of what we consider to be orthodoxy.
Well, the religions that they're bringing in are those Eastern philosophies.
Yeah, and if your question is this possible? Yeah, it's possible. For me to say, is that what it is? That this is a New Age center, or that this is a spin? I don't know. But their view is just ecumenicalism.
Well, I don't mean, are they calling themselves that, but does this fall into
Is that an
the same-
example of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Does this group show these characteristics?
Yeah.
Because they're embracing all these, Eastern philosophies.
Yeah.
And
Possibly. That's all I can say is possibly. That is. I mean, it falls in line, but I can't say that it is because I'm not an expert.
But it sounds like
all churches that are New Age probably don't know it. And if they do, then they're blatant about it.
Well, it is a fact that St. John's Episcopal Church in New York has these lasers mounted on their roof. That is a fact. Now, I don't know how they could get so far that way. And I mean, all of the things with holographic and everything. Maybe they don't know it, but it sure seems like they would. But then I think that the vast majority of the churches that have been seduced don't know it. Yeah, I would say that.
So they may be part of a network and don't know it then.
Yeah. Yeah, just like I don't think Jim Jones knew that he was, because I think he just out to see himself. Okay. Hinduistic euphemisms. Now, this is also a very basic deal of seeing the plan instituted, and that is taking some of, and it's not only Hinduism, it's having to do with anything in the occult realm. A euphemism is when you substitute a less offensive term for something that might be considered to be more offensive just to get your idea across, to make it more palatable. And a good example would be today it's very popular to talk about traditional healers in some of these various third world countries, or you go into, for example, last night, those of you that saw the Satanism thing on TV last night, and when they were showing the Haitian exorcism scene in New York, that guy would not be called a witch doctor or, you know, a shaman or any of those terms that would denote something negative. He would be called a traditional healer. And in fact, in Africa and some of these places where that sort of thing takes place regularly, they have their traditional healers have an office right next to the doctor, the medical doctor. And when the people come in for treatment, they ask them which one you want to go to. You want to go to the doctor, you want to go to the traditional healer. And this is an extremely accepted practice. Mainly, as in a lot of things like these New Age, United Nations hospitals that have been set up around the world and everything. This is where this sort of thing is taking place mainly, and it has been accomplished as a result of euphemisms. Okay, the goals of the plan: to establish a world food authority so that they can do away with hunger. To establish a world monetary system which will basically be a cashless society, whether it's by, you know, the credit card system or having that microchip embedded in the back of your hand, or, you know, whatever. This is the goal, is to have a world monetary system. That way, the rationale behind that is once that is done, then we can control the economy so that you won't have depressions, you won't have recessions, you won't have money shortages, you just won't have any of the problems that the economy worldwide has today, because it'll all be controlled on a global basis. Thirdly, a universal tax and draft. There is already a move to universalize a police system that is being backed by or supported, not backed, but supported by the U.S. government. According to Constance Cumby, is receiving a lot of rave reviews from the War College, and they're, you know, really trying to see something like this happen. And lastly, syncretism. Syncretism is basically the unity of all religions. Okay. That is what they say. We want to show that basically all religions are going to the same place, and so when we bring in this new Messiah, he will unify all people under one religion. Well, the next question is, well, what about those who say no? What about those who disagree? What about those who just, you know, say, no, I believe that you're wrong. I don't think all religions are the same. There's probably people in the world that believe that way. Well, they have an answer to that too. This will be accomplished by transporting all those who disagree into, you know, we were talking about those different levels of development. Well, they will somehow, whether it's teleporting, you know, beaming them up or down or across, whatever, they get transported into another dimension. Just kind of get them out of someplace where they'll be happier anyway. They wouldn't really like living under this kind of, and then that, since all life is eternal and they'll just continue to evolve, and as the world revolves and the spirits evolve, then they will, you know, come back to this plane again someday, many million eons down the road.
Was that
A euphemism?
Are you going to send them off to another plane, or is that just a word for eliminating them?
Probably what it will be, you know, I don't know what their mentality behind it is, but probably what it'll be is their explanation for the rapture. You know, when all of a sudden all the Christians are gone, they'll say, well, we just transported them, we sent them off to another plane. But it might be a euphemism, yeah. I don't know. This is something that's been prophesied even by Blavatsky, but primarily by Bailey. You know, she was the one who said this is what we'll do, because not everybody's going to see things our way. So our solution to that is just we'll transport them someplace else. Because by the time when Maitreya is here, and by the time that the stage is set, or by the time, you know, it happens, the power will be there, because we will all be so unified in our cosmic, you know, the whole thing will be sewed together, and the planets will all be in line, and it'll happen.
Questions?
Yes.
Since traditional healers are mainly animistic, and since they support traditional healers, do you happen to know what their viewpoint on evil spirits and all that?
Yeah. Basically, they will use the term spirit as like, for example, Shirley MacLaine's spirit guide. But they don't really see these as being persons as much as personifications. Now, we noticed in the angelology class that demons are actually persons. They are personalities. But the New Age and certain aspects of Hinduism view these as actually being entities, personalities. But the New Age movement specifically, because God is all things, all things are God, and they don't really, and all spirits make up this one, cosmic spirit, that these are more of personifications of the force than anything else. And remember when we talked about Taoism and comparing it to Star Wars and everything, it's not so much of a thing of dualism where you have good and bad and let's see who's going to win, but it's all, God is both good and bad. He has his dark side. It has its dark side, and it has its good side, and the two must be balanced. So they'll call them spirits, but really they're thinking more of personifications than actual spirits. Okay, there are many buzzwords and symbols. I'm going to run through these, and it's, most of them you've probably heard, so don't worry about if you just catch the ones that you want to. Awakening, well, okay, that's not a cosmic energy. These are, again, the New Age movement does not have a franchise on these words, and you might hear these words in other circles that are not necessarily pointing them toward New Age, but then things like global village and spaceship Earth, these are New Age terms that were coined by the New Age and pretty much indigenous to them. Human potential is another one. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though, human potential, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to do the best that you can do in things. It just depends on your means. The ends don't justify the means. Spaceship Earth. Also, some of their symbols are rainbows. They're big, hidden dangers of the rainbow thing. But remember, rainbow is also a Christian symbol. Triangles. Okay, triangles are definitely a New Age thing, but triangle is also a symbol of the Trinity to some Christians. Pyramid. Pyramid power is also real big. The eye in a pyramid is big. The eye in a triangle. Unicorns. Pegasus. A lot of people just like unicorns. They just think they're neat, and they like to have unicorn stickers on their windshields. They like to have rainbow stickers on their windshields. Of course, to a New Ager, they think this is neat because the more these symbols are used, then the quicker this, each time these symbols are used, it just generates and heightens this cosmic force that's, beginning to gurgle and boil, and then when it, 666 is another big one. They believe this to be a very spiritual number. Alice Bailey, several times in her writings, makes this statement. And their view is that the more this can be brought out, so in New Age art, you'll see 666 is very prevalent in New Age art. The more that they can use this number, then the quicker they think that this whole thing will come down. Concentric circles is another one, and a lot of times, just circles within a circle within a circle. This is indicative of their framework or their network. It's indicative of the never-ending cycles that they believe the whole universe is based on. A lot of times it will, each circle will either become darker as it goes toward the center, or it'll become lighter. It'll be dark on the outside, and then each concentric circle becomes lighter. And this is also, when you see that, it's usually symbolic of, you become closer and closer to the truth. Okay, New Age doctrines. I've kind of mentioned this before on Revelation. the two aspects of their view of revelation is, one, that revelation is attained telepathically. It's not as the Christian view with the revelation of the Word, where God spoke through His men as the Holy Spirit, moved them and came upon them and anointed them and inspired them, but that the various writers at whatever age and whatever stage of development of mankind receive these messages telepathically. They don't believe in automatic writing. This is spiritualism that the New Age didn't. Automatic writing is where now, but then Shirley MacLaine does. So this is where you come into a thing where you could say there's a diversity within the New Age movement. But Madame Blavatsky, she says automatic writing is very dangerous. I don't know why, since she didn't believe in spiritualism, but she made that statement. And she said that what she received was not automatic writings. She would receive ideas that she would sort through, and Kut Humi would speak to her telepathically. He would give her ideas. Sometimes he'd give her sentences, and then she would put the sentences together, and then it would come out. David Spangler says that when he wrote his first book about Jesus, he thought he was going to write a pamphlet, and he figured it'd just take him a couple hours. He just had these ideas in his head that he wanted to put down on paper, and as he began writing, it took days, and when he was done, he had a whole book. So he doesn't call it automatic writing where you go into some sort of a trance-like thing, but he just received these messages. He was aware that these thoughts were coming into his head and was receiving them from somewhere. Okay, and that these thoughts, these revelations are continual. Alice Bailey says, never has deity left itself at any time without a witness. Notice that, deity left itself. Never has man demanded a light that the light has not been forthcoming. Never has there been a time, cycle, or world period when there was not the giving out of the teaching and spiritual help which human need demanded. There has always been this revelation from God, the cosmic whatever. Okay, so that brings us to God. What their view of God is naturally pantheistic, as we've said. They make a big thing of the yin and yang, as we've said. But they do have a trinity. They have a trinity that's known as the Solo Logos, or the solar trinity. Solar Logos. And they make the comparisons between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. The Father is the will. The Son is love and wisdom. And we'll talk more about their concept of love in a minute. And the Holy Spirit would be the equivalent of active intelligence. This is known as the Solar Logos. Jesus is also pretty big to the New Agers, although not quite as big as he is to Christians. Their view of the hierarchy of spiritual things is very similar to old Gnosticism, in that they believe the Solar Logos gives off what's known as the 7 rays. They emanate the 7 rays, and that's another thing. In fact, usually the New Age pyramids have 7 bands in it, and another one of their symbols are 7 rays. They'll have things that have 7 rays emanating from them. Well, the Solar Logos gives off these 7 rays, and the 7 rays in turn produced many masters, and I forget how many of them there are in their hierarchy, but Jesus is considered one of the masters, and he's the very bottom one. I think there's 7. I think there's 7 of them. He's the very bottom one, behind Buddha and Confucius and Krishna and so on. They teach that he was only a man, and as I said, the spiritual aspect of most of their teaching is based on Dowling's Aquarian Gospel, where he teaches that Christ was a man who had become reincarnated to such a level that he had achieved this Christ consciousness. and his goal was to teach the Christ consciousness to others. He was nothing more than a reincarnation of other great masters, being Hercules, Hermes, Rama, Mithra, who was a Persian hero deity, Krishna, and Buddha. So he was a reincarnation of these other guys, but not quite as high on the hierarchy as they were. Benjamin Cream states that perfect men in their time, he's talking about all of these guys who were incarnations of the Christ, perfect men in their time, all sons of men who became sons of God for having revealed their innate divinity. In other words, they figured out who they were, God, and revealed that to me. Here I am, and you can be the same thing. And so by them being able to do that, they became sons of God just by revealing that that's what they were. According to Dowling, Jesus did not die on the cross. He became unmanifested. It wasn't death that he experienced. He became unmanifested, and then when he remanifested, he was in this seventh level. And the idea behind all of that is that it's nothing that we can't do. We just have to get to that seventh level. So that's their teaching on Jesus. Their teaching on man, of course, is where they center most of their attention. They teach that man is basically spiritual, not material. In fact, Dowling, talking about the physical body that we inhabit, stated in the Korean Gospel, it is manifest, is the result of force, but is not. N-A-U-G-H-T. It is an illusion, nothing more. Very similar to the Christian Science approach. It is nothing more than a manifestation of the cosmic force pushing itself together and creating a house for the soul or for the spirit. They teach that man is essentially good. In fact, Alice Bailey in the Externalization of the Hierarchy said, at the Transfiguration, Christ revealed the glory which is innate in all men. So you can see how they pick and choose from the Bible, just like any false religion will, to be able to produce their doctrines. They also teach that man is divine. Dowling's Jesus was, according to Dowling, Jesus was known as saying, when he was giving his Great Commission, he said, what I can do, all men can do. Go, preach the gospel of the omnipotence of man. In fact, the Lord Maitreya, in Cream's book about the teachings that Maitreya had given him, Maitreya the Christ, Maitreya is supposedly to have said, my purpose is to show man that he need fear no more, that all of light and truth rest within his heart, that when this simple fact is known, man will become God. Okay, it's the same thing that's written on the outside of the Church of Unity down there, 21st and Oliver. So the question, if man is God, to whom does he pray? Okay, well, they've thought about this and they have an answer. Cream says, one doesn't pray to oneself. One prays to the God within him. Okay, it's what the Hindus call the Kundalini force. Kundalini force. And this is, in fact, the Kundalini force, ironically enough, is known as the serpent, the fiery serpent within. And that's the God that dwells within each man is depicted in Hindu thought as a fiery serpent. And, going back to that same lie that was told in the Garden of Eden by the serpent, that, you shall not surely die, but you shall become as gods. The basic view, or the basic reasoning behind all forms of yoga is to align that Kundalini force within the person. And usually it's depicted in their drawings of, you see these, like it's found along the spine, because that's the alignment of the man. So when they can get that force lined up within them, then they've achieved their goal of whatever yoga whether it's Hatha Yoga, which is just the physical, the lotus position thing, or Tantra Yoga when they get into the various sexual perversions and everything in between. Okay, sin and salvation. Basically, of course, there's no place for sin. The only sin to a New Ager is not believing what they're saying. Just not getting into this whole gig. Rather than evil, they don't really even have a concept of evil. Evil is non-existent. Instead of that, they believe that all is love. Now, that sounds very 60s, flower childish and all of this, but their concept of love is quite different. Remember, love, wisdom being the second person in their Trinity. That's why I have love in quotation marks here on your outline. Cream says that love is a totally impersonal but all-inclusive, cohesive, binding force which draws all men and all things together and holds them together. It is the energy that makes humanity one. Okay, God is love. They'll grab that verse and then they'll show you, yes, God is love, and it's all of this put together, and it's that glue, the cosmic glue. Yeah.
You said a couple, 3 or 4 words in that quote.
Okay. Love is the force that holds it, that makes the universe happen. Holds it together, physically, spiritually, and everything else. Well, let me give you an example. By permission, I have a letter that was written to Judy last year when she underwent her last cancer surgery. It was dated February 8th, 1988. And this was written by her cousin, who is into astrology and embraces a lot of New Age concepts. It says, "Dear Cousin Judy, I am so grieved to hear of all of the pain that you are going through. It moves me to comment on all the very deep things you have been learning these past 4 years. Whatever the truth has been, and whatever the effort to trust it, please trust in this. The love you seek is with you all the time. The transformation that is going on in you is of great dimension. Whether this world holds the inspiration or whether the new one is in sight, the depth of your vision and the truth of the power you behold is once in many lifetimes. Take heart in this month of hearts. Pour love into yourself. You don't deserve illness and strain. Please take light and life. They are so plentiful, even in atoms. You can take some from the atomic level. Plenty of atoms, just in this paper and ink. Love is in it too. I miss you and have missed you during all these times in recent years." So that's what their concept of love is, paper and ink. Okay, salvation is attained by attunement or at-one-ment, which basically just means, getting that Kundalini force lined up, getting the planets lined up, getting all of the various structures of, world order lined up, just having everything all lined up with this whole goal of making everything so perfect. Reunification with God. But remember what their concept of God is. And so by us getting really in tune or attuned to God, remember we used to be that way, and somehow or another we lost it. Luciferic initiation. This is very fundamental to the whole approach to the New Age movement. Lucifer is not a bad guy. David Spangler writes about him quite a bit, and basically they believe that Lucifer guides men through their experiences. Remember in the letter it says that these experiences that you're going through are geared to teach you, the love and everything. Well, Christians have the same sort of thing, but they're different. They believe that Lucifer is the force or the entity or the personification of the experiences that we go through, and his goal is to teach us, to force us into positions to where we're aware of the divinity that's within us, and we see what they call the new light. And this is their equivalent to being born again. Spangler said, Lucifer moves in to create the light within through the pressure of experience. Okay, Lucifer moves in to create, he puts pressure on us and makes us experience these things so that we can see that light within us, that divinity that's within us. Christ moves out to release that light, that wisdom, that love into creation. So that what has been forged in the furnace of creation, in other words, by the force that created us, what was put into our beings at that moment of creation can become a light into the world and not simply stagnate within the being. Okay, everybody understand that? Lucifer works from the outside, creating these situations in our life that force us to see the God within us. Okay? Oh, I see. And then Christ, and we're not talking about a carpenter in Nazareth. Christ works from the inside out as he takes this God within us, as it takes this God within us, and begins to make it manifest in our life so that we can take the light that we see within us and shine it upon the whole, take our light up on the hillside, and rather than have it to stagnate inside of us. That's their whole, and when this is accomplished, this is known as the Luciferic initiation. Okay.
That's why they use 666 because of...
Yeah. Yeah. Now they'll take the concepts from the Bible. In fact, they'll admit that Lord Maitreya, he is the equivalent of the biblical Antichrist, but he's not the bad guy the Bible paints him to be. The Bible's wrong. The Bible is tainted. The Bible's been changed. That's not the way it was supposed to be. That's not what Jesus preached. Jesus, the gospel of Jesus, you read Dowling's book, and that's how you want to find out what Jesus really preached. But the Christians have changed it, and it's been turned around and that sort of thing. So Antichrist, when Jesus said, "I'll come again," basically he was teaching the same thing that they are with their Lord Maitreya. And, yeah. Okay. According to Theodore Roszak, in his book, Animal Unfinished, he lists 150 paths to God. So when they say that their spiritual view of mankind is all-inclusive, they can, here we have 150 paths that all go to him, and they can claim that to be all-inclusive. As we said in the beginning, though, with those quotes in the beginning, the only thing they exclude is the monotheistic approach. So in close, does anybody have any questions over? Yeah, Doug. Theodore Roszak, R-O-S-Z-A-K. Alan.
How do they tell us where we're going, but how do they explain how we got in this situation in the first place? Because it would seem like, they don't believe in just a static universe. We're all changing and we're developing and going to a certain place. How do they explain how we got in this situation?
I don't know. Now, as I said, there are some New Age philosophers and there are some New Age anthropological works out now that attempt to explain origins from a pantheistic view, but I don't understand what that explanation is. It's just like when we were talking about reincarnation last week, and well, if reincarnation, if a person is reincarnated and he works out the karma that he produced in a previous life, then at some point you got to go back to point zero. You got to have that first base where the life began, and if he was not working out any karma in that life, then why did he have to become reborn? Because if his life was just beginning, he didn't have any bad karma to work off, so he should have been in nirvana in the first place. And, it's a valid statement, and I don't really know what their explanation for that is. Okay, there's 150 paths to God. I thought this was kind of basically a fairly new concept. And I recently read Pilgrim's Progress for the first time, and I was interested in one of the characters. Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory about a guy by the name of Christian who leaves his family and friends in town behind because none of them would believe that this destruction was on the way. And they all kind of ridiculed him, so he left and headed off to this eternal city to see his Lord Jesus. And along the way, he meets several people. Some of them go along with him. Some of them oppose him in this route. And about halfway through his journey, he's walking along with his friend Hopeful, and they're both going along this path toward the end, and they come across this guy by the name of Ignorance. And I'd like to read a page of their dialogue. And Ignorance tells them that he's going to the same place. They see him coming along this other path, and he comes up beside him, and he said, yeah, I'm going to the same city that you're going to. And so Christian says, but thou camest not in at the wicket gate that is at the head of this way. Thou camest in hither through that same crooked lane. And therefore I fear, however, thou mayest think of thyself, that when the reckoning day shall come, thou wilt have laid to thy charge that thou art a thief and a robber, instead of getting admittance into the city. To which Ignorance replied, Gentlemen, you be utter strangers to me. I know you not. Be content to follow the religion of your country, and I will follow the religion of mine. I hope all will be well. And as for the gate that you talk of, all the world knows that it is a great way off of our country. I cannot think of any man in all our parts doth so much as know the way to it, nor need they matter whether they do or know. Since we have, as you see, a fine, pleasant green lane that comes down from our country, the next way into the way. And when Christian saw that the man was wise in his own conceit, he said to Hopeful, whispering, there is more hope of a fool than of him. Proverbs 26:12. And said moreover, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to every one that he is a fool. Ecclesiastes 10:3. I don't know, as I said in the beginning, if the New Age movement is the way that the Lord is going to allow the culmination of all things to be or not. I do know one thing, that the Lord is in control. The Lord is sovereign. And with that in mind, I think that we are, as Christians, mandated to fix our eyes on Jesus. And as Greg Laurie said, so many Christians today are so busy worried about when all this is going to happen that we're not paying much attention to what we should do until he gets here. And so I think it's very important for all of us to fix our eyes on Jesus, bury ourselves in his word, and we don't need to know all the ins and outs of all of the counterfeits. We can recognize the enemy, and from that point on, we just go for the gold. Let's pray. Father,